Welcome back to Real Clear Radio Hour, brought to you by the Competitive Enterprise Institute. I'm your host, Bill Frezza. My apologies for the laryngitis, but the show must go on. For our second half today, we have successful businessman turned education entrepreneur Jeff Sandifer. Jeff, welcome to the show.
Oh, thanks, Bill. Great to be here.
You know, after a tremendously successful career as an energy investor, you embarked on a journey to remake education in America. You endowed your education foundation that you created with over $100 million. You launched programs at both the K through 12 and the MBA level. Before we dive into the details, what set you on this path?
Well, in hindsight, it sounds grandiose to say I started out to remake education. That's actually not the way it happened. I was 29 years old. I'd made a lot of money, and I didn't know what to do next. So I remembered that a professor of mine at Harvard Business School had tried to get me to stay at the school and teach, and I thought, I'll teach for 1 year. I'll be a Socratic teacher, so I'll just only ask questions, and maybe that'll help me figure out what to do next with my life. That was 25 years ago, and while I've stayed very active in business, I've taught Socratically, so not lecturing, but asking questions every semester for the last 25 years. So it was really a personal journey of exploration, not some grand idea to remake education.
Well, then what made you want to scale it up? I mean, you could have just been a great teacher.
Well, I think when I was teaching at the MBA level, which is where I started, it was demand. The higher we set the bar, the more students who came. The harder we made the courses, the more students we attracted. So it was really just a demand of focusing on serving the students as customers, treating them as heroes in the making. And it was simply a matter of we kept having more and more demands, so we found more entrepreneurs who wanted to teach. And that really launched the Acton MBA and MBA program.
So supply followed demand, as it often does in the marketplace. You mentioned heroes, and reading about you, I see that you claim that geniuses and heroes play a big role in education. What do you mean by that?
Well, I think that we undersell what students are able to do, particularly at the K through 12 level. In fact, what we've done in education in America is we've moved from an educational system that at the time of the Revolution had apprenticeships and treated 13-year-olds as if they could command battleships because they could. We've, in fact, gone the other way in modern American education. We make infants out of adolescents. We protect them. We baby them at age 25. They've gotten a college degree. They don't know how to do anything, and they move back in with their parents. So what we're really trying to do is reverse that and treat young children appropriately as the heroes that they are, challenge them, and prepare them to be masters of their own destiny.
You've stated that there are 4 fundamental questions you have students ask themselves. What are they and why?
Well, there's 3 questions we want students to ask themselves at the end of life, at the end of this hero's journey. Okay. Did I contribute something meaningful? Was I a good person? And who did I love and who loved me? We found those questions by sending our MBA students out to ask successful people near the end of their careers and the end of their lives, what mattered to you? What kept coming back were those questions over and over and over again. So what we're doing is beginning with the end in mind and asking students, even at a very young age, to prepare for their hero's journey and prepare to answer those questions at every step along the way.
Talk a little bit about the master-apprentice relationship. This was such an important part of growing the economy in America. I know that in entrepreneurship, finding mentors and learning from them is such an important part of it. We see so little of that in formal education. How can you possibly bring that back into the classroom?
Well, I like to think of this in terms of 3 levels. Learn to know, learn to do, and learn to be. At the time of the Revolution, and at the time that America was becoming the most powerful nation on the earth in the 18th and 19th centuries, we really focused on learn to do. People went out and learned to do things as apprentices underneath a master, things that were valuable to the community and to society. By having the courage to learn to do, they learned to be. They became someone. They became someone who had courage and who had character. And learn to know, well, knowledge was important. You need to know how to learn to read and write. You did that primarily in one-room schoolhouses. You learned other knowledge along the way, and you were a lifelong learner. What I think we've done is, in modern education, traditional education, we've made learn to know the end-all and be-all. Memorize something, regurgitate it on a test, pat it on the head, get an A, and learn something else. That just doesn't work in an age of Google when you can look up anything you need to know.
Everything you want is at your fingertips. Why should it be in your head?
So we've created people who can memorize things in a world of Google, which makes no sense. What we need is there are people who know how to go out and do something courageous in the world. So the master-apprentice relationship, we're preparing our students at very young ages to go out and work in the world as they learn to do things that are valuable. And then we find out they're vacuuming up amazing amounts of knowledge. I mean, students can learn at a rate 10 times the normal rate if they care to. Doing things that are exciting and fun and matter is what makes them care.
You know, it's funny, just from personal experience, my younger son, my difficult child, was always a B student, didn't get along with his teachers. The one question he always asked is, why do I need to know this? And as soon as he got out of the classroom and into the laboratory and started doing, his entire approach to learning changed. I remember getting a phone call from him saying, Dad, I need to learn thermodynamics. Will you buy me a thermodynamics book? And I was like, what? And I watched his whole life flip around as soon as he started doing.
Well, when we think of a subject like thermodynamics, as an engineer, thermodynamics was a very hard course. Organic chemistry was a hard course. They're hard courses because we've designed them in our educational system to flunk out anyone without 180 IQ. In fact, we purposely taught them in a way that makes them difficult to comprehend so we can create scholars of chemistry or scholars of thermodynamics. But the concept of thermodynamics is relatively simple if you're a practicing engineer and need to know it. So I want to reverse that, do exactly what happened with your son. I understand I need to know this to build a bridge. I need to know this to design a chemical plant. If that's true, thermodynamics becomes easy and something that's fun to learn, and particularly in a world where you can watch YouTube videos, try real-world experiments. I mean, you can make engineering come alive and chemistry come alive in a way that a textbook never can.
Let's take it down. I do want to come back maybe in a future show to talk about higher education, but let's take it back down to K through 12. And why don't you give us an overview of the Acton Academy? What is it?
So the major overarching theme of the Acton Academy is that we believe every child is a genius who is going to go out and change the world in a profound way. And I want to be careful with that word genius because we often have people come back and say, well, not everyone has 180 IQ. And of course they don't. But that's not what the word genius means. It means to have a very special talent in something. And so we believe that every parent, every child, every guide, and guide is our word for teacher, every guide that comes in our door is a hero on a hero's journey, a genius who's going to go out and change the world. If you truly believe that about everyone who comes in the door, it is amazing what these children can do.
Do you get them to believe it themselves?
In fact, they believe it, and they know it's true. What they'll do is they'll disguise that when they're around adults who don't believe it. In fact, there's only one real firing offense in our school. If you shame a child, you are fired immediately. And unfortunately, I think in too much of traditional education, we've put the teacher as this power figure, this controller in a group of 20 students, getting them to regurgitate in kind of a factory-like setting. And some students will be very compliant to that. And they'll actually do their job, do what they're asked. I was that kind of student. You were probably that kind of student. We made straight A's. We got rewarded. But often, like your son, the very best, the rebels, won't put up with that. And so at our school, we actually celebrate the heroes. We celebrate the students as geniuses. We give them very difficult tasks, often self-paced, and we turn them loose. I'd also say, Bill, one of the most important things we do, the students at Acton run the classroom. They run the governance. They do all the janitorial work. They have a system of rules that they adopted.
Is this a one-room schoolhouse kind of model? Is it mixed age groups?
Yeah. Great question. It's a very important thing, too. We have mixed age groups. So all elementary school students, between 36 and 40 students, are in one room together all the time. All middle school students, 36 to 40, in one room. And when we open our high school next year, it'll be the same thing. One of the things that traditional education really has wrong is the idea of grades. When you put children in a mixed age environment where they can teach each other, and by the way, often it's the younger students teaching the older students, but it's amazing when you see them teach each other how much more quickly they can learn.
Describe a little bit the tools you put at their disposal. Obviously, they can't do this without resources.
Right. I'll give you an example of math. So in math at the elementary age, we use a number of game-based adaptive programs. We use a program called Khan Academy. We use a program called Dreambox. We use a program called ST Math. So we use 5 or 6 different programs. Students can use any one they want to learn in a self-paced way. They set goals. They set SMART goals, goals that are specific and achievable every week, and they work in groups that they self-organize. Now, here's something that's hard to imagine. We have not taught one minute of math in our school. Zero. And I mean exactly zero math.
No teacher at a blackboard doing equations.
No teacher even walking around coaching. I mean, zero help in math. Our students are progressing at 3 times the normal rate.
How do you know? I mean, at the end of the day, do you test?
Yeah, with the beauty of these programs like Khan Academy and Dreambox, you can see every operation, everything the student does down to the problem level. You can see how many mistakes they make. You can see how long it takes per problem. They're free to explore all the way through calculus at whatever pace and whatever path they want to choose. The programs will suggest a path and reward them with badges and bonuses in which we celebrate those. But think about a school that has not taught 1 minute of math, and yet with these new game-based adaptive programs, we actually have students learning at 3 times the normal rate.
The only place I've ever seen this is in science fiction novels.
Well, and the truth is, it sounds amazing until you realize the problem is the bar in a traditional school is set too low. And by the way, half of our students come in at the very top of the testing regime. I mean, they've been really exceptional students. They'll test in the top 1% as compared to private school students. The other half of our students come in with test scores in the bottom 10% of the public schools. So we're talking about at the ends of the barbell, the very brightest and the most challenged students if you look at a traditional school. And guess what? After 6 months, you can't tell the difference between the two.
I find that so hard to believe. You know, I was going to ask you, what do we do with the low achievers, the lazy, and the dim-witted? But maybe that's not the right way to ask the question.
Well, I think we have to make a difference between not working hard and not having the capacity. Now, there are clearly some children with very serious learning difficulties, and we're not equipped to handle
Right, yeah, that mentally handicapped needs special programs.
Now,
That's
we
different.
can handle children with ADD. Probably 2/3 of our students have been diagnosed with ADD. We don't have any problem with that.
What do you make of all the Adderall and Ritalin we're pumping into these kids?
Oh, it's crazy. It's absolutely insane. Our daughter is older and now is in high school. At her junior high school, which was not an acting school, she went to a traditional school, over half of the children there were on some sort of ADD drug.
It is amazing.
It's absolutely insane. And we've got those same children, and they thrive. But we got them to get up and walk around. They can go get a drink. They don't have to sit at a desk all day. They learn not to fidget when they're in a Socratic discussion. They know there's rules of engagement, but they don't have to sit in a Socratic discussion all day. They can get up and walk around. So the answer is you give these students lots of tools, but to your point about laziness or lack of trying, we won't accept that. The students have to commit and work hard. They set their own goals, and they will work hard.
So do you flunk kids out?
Well, yeah, we don't have grades. The standard is always, is that the best you can do? But the students sign a covenant with each other about how they will behave and try and be on this hero's journey. We have lost very few, if any, students from the elementary school. About 85% of the students who enter at the middle school level are prospering. So we've lost about 15% of the students that came in from a different elementary school can't seem to adjust to this self-paced environment.
It's too much for them. How does Acton different from Montessori schools? Haven't Montessori schools been doing something like this for a long time?
That's a great question. We're very similar to a Montessori school in the sense of letting students choose and being student-directed. We're incorporating all the latest game-based technology, and I want to be careful here. Our students are not on a computer more than probably an hour and a half a day, unless they're doing word processing or spreadsheets or something where their computer is a tool. So they're not living in a computer game. But we found that using these game-based adaptive programs for skills lets students move at a very rapid rate and allows us to track. So we're different from Montessori in that we favor those. We're different in the sense of this whole overarching theme of the hero's journey. And we're different in the sense of we love and celebrate the idea of apprenticeships out in the real world. So we're almost a Montessori plus is what I would call Acton.
So do your students do internships?
We call them apprenticeships. The only reason we make that distinction is we want them to do them for pay. We don't want this to be a program where you're just making copies. We want students to pick an area where they use their greatest gifts in a way that brings them great joy to solve a deep burning need in the world. So even at age 10, 11, 12, they're out doing something, experimenting with looking for the place they can find their calling.
And they get paid?
Well, I'll just answer that with saying it's against federal law for anyone under the age of 14 to work for pay. Unless you're in agriculture, throwing a newspaper, or a child actor.
Wow.
Maybe you can work on getting that law changed.
That's a pretty heavy lift. Give us some examples. What are the kinds of things kids are doing outside the classroom?
Oh, they'll go work for an architect. They'll go work emptying bedpans in a hospital. They'll work for a veterinarian. We have students work doing manual labor out on the farm. Those students work in a bakery, work as a dance instructor. Really, for every student, there's a different story because they have a different set of gifts and a different set of things they want to try out. So we think of apprenticeships as being a rehearsal, a dress rehearsal for your calling.
Do you find the kids sampling a few different things until they find the one that really, floats their boat?
Yeah, we absolutely expect them to do that. And we also expect them to learn pretty early in this hero's journey. It's all about failure and getting back up. So these jobs are not supposed to be glamorous. We want to do something where they're learning something, but they're working very hard and they're willing to start scrubbing floors, being in the mailroom. It's why, frankly, we have them do all the janitorial work in the school because it teaches them that, you have to work hard. And work's not always glamorous. It's often hard and dirty, and you do that in order to get ahead.
The best teacher that I've ever had in my life, and which I actually didn't come in contact with until after I graduated college, is failure.
Yes.
How do your kids get exposed to failure, and how do you help them learn from it?
Well, we really celebrate failure. One of our mottos is fail early, cheaply, and often. And so we say that heroes are not the people that succeed. So this isn't about hero worship. Heroes are people who get knocked down and get back up. So we work a lot in what it feels like to get knocked down and when you have to get back up. And it's hard, and it takes courage and perseverance and stamina. So we don't even talk about it. These students experience it. They experience it in the projects we do. They experience it in the apprenticeships. So failure is something we live with every day, and we celebrate it because it hurts, and you have to celebrate it to get back up and try again.
Talk a little about the social interactions of the kids. I'm a product of public schools. My memories all revolve around the smart kids getting beat up in the gym by the dumb kids.
Yeah.
What's it like at Acton?
We don't have any of that. And one reason is, with only 40 students in the room, and it's all one big open room, there's no gym to get beat up in. So everyone's, like their own little society. Now, I do want to say it's a very dysfunctional society. And one of my takeaways from being in the classroom in our studios all the time, one of my takeaways is really that all human organizations are dysfunctional. My family's dysfunctional. Every company I've ever had has been dysfunctional. So what you're really doing is learning to manage somewhere between, dictatorship and tyranny and anarchy. You're looking for that happy medium of freedom and rights being respected and living in a free market economy. Our students have something called Eagle Bucks that they exchange with each other, both for earning and for penalties. And so you're learning to kind of coexist with people with all the messiness that the real world has. But our students run that themselves. They run the council. They create the economic systems. They will drain liquidity from the Eagle Buck system when there's too much inflation. I mean, it's really amazing to see a functioning society run by 10, 11, and 12-year-olds in the middle school and 6, 7, 8, 9-year-olds in elementary school.
Do you find leaders emerge?
Leaders do emerge. It's interesting, but they emerge in different ways. Some of them will try on the kind of tyrannical dictator mode for a while. Others will try to reason. And so they get to try on different modes of leadership and when to be quiet, when to ask a question. So leaders emerge, but they also rotate. And the leadership mantle rotates around to different styles depending on what the group needs.
So there's no Lord of the Flies going on here.
Oh, no, Lord of the Flies goes on all the time. That's what I meant about dysfunction. We will slide into Lord of the Flies, and the hardest thing about being a guide at Acton is stepping back and letting that happen. Obviously, we'll not let anybody get hurt, so bullying will get you immediately sent home for a very long time. So there's no bullying allowed, no physical coercion. But Lord of the Flies and messiness will happen. It'll get out of control. As a guide, I want to step in. I want to control it and make it orderly. If I'll just step back and take a deep breath, and probably step back one more time and take a deep breath, the students will fix the problem on their own. Once they fix it, they own the solution. And by the way, Bill, it lasts for a couple of months, and then something else deteriorates, and they have to step in with a new solution. So they're always trying new governance, new economic systems, new taxation systems, because the old system inevitably frays somehow, and they have to step in and fix it. But think of the lessons they're learning about democracy, about markets, about human interactions and dispute resolution as they govern their own studios.
Well, I'm also wondering, given the fact that we're a mobile society, once a child has been through your classroom, they're unfit to be in a standard classroom ever again. What's going to happen to them?
No, that's a very good point. One thing we do warn parents about is once you take this step, it's going to be very difficult for your student to sit for 8 hours a day in a desk and be talked at. They really probably won't tolerate that. So the only thing we say to families is, once you take this step, and students learn to be self-governing, it will be very difficult to go back to a traditional environment. So I think you're right. We have had very few students. In fact, I can't think of one we've had that's gone back to a traditional environment. I don't think they can tolerate that.
I'm sure you measure feedback from the parents. What do they think of all this?
Well, that's another tip at Acton. One thing we do, we get feedback every week. We send out a survey on the internet to every parent, every child. Those results of us being rated by our customers, and we see every student and every parent as a customer, we see that feedback. It's open to the public. Anyone in the community can read the feedback, and we react to it. So we're getting feedback continuously and learning from the community about what they need and what's working and what's not. In fact, if I could put one thing in anything all across education that would fix it, it would be requiring every teacher, every principal, every person involved in education to send out a customer survey every week and make the results public.
Yeah, but parents of public schools are not customers. They're supplicants.
I understand. That's why I would put the rule in, because they should be.
Yeah, no, it's a very, I ended up privately high schooling my kids. They went to public elementary school and private high school. It was a completely different world because you were a paying customer, and they treat you that way. It was very different.
Even surprising from the elite private schools we deal with, they don't really want this system in place either. And by the way, we get feedback that we ignore. We get noise in the system. We get so it's not as if you react to every bit of feedback. Sure. Sometimes we fire customers. It's like in the real business. The customer is king if you've chosen to serve them as customer. But sometimes very rarely we've had to fire a couple of customers because they weren't our kind of customer.
Let me change gears on you a little bit and talk about scalability. It's one thing for a highly ideological, motivated, brilliant, rich guy to start a school. It's another thing to figure out how this can ever scale up as a product of a mediocre public school system. I maybe had 4 teachers in all my years I would call excellent. How do you find, recruit, and compensate excellent teachers, and are there enough of them to go around?
Well, there's millions of excellent teachers, and they're called students. So you have to remember, in our model, we don't have any teachers. But by pledge at the school, a guide may not ever answer a question in the classroom. So when I'm in the studio...
Whoa. Say that again.
When I'm in the studio, I am never allowed to answer any questions. Not where's the bathroom, not what time does this happen.
No.
The answer is always, that's a great question, what do you think? So we never teach at all, period. We provide challenges. I'll invite you into some sort of game we're going to play. If you want to play the game, you have to play by the rules, but you can even opt out of that game. So the secret to scaling this is understanding you do not want adults in charge of anything except safety.
Wow.
These children can curate, create challenges. With the resources on the internet, they can create better courses than we can.
This is mind-boggling. How do you compare this to the Teach for America program?
Well, I'm a big fan of Teach for America, so I'm a big fan of KIPP and lots of things. But Teach for America is looking for, as I understand it, very bright kids out of some of the top colleges to put them in to be traditional teachers. The problem with traditional education is the concept of a traditional teacher in a classroom of 20. I'm in control. I speak. You listen. You regurgitate. Or even slightly better, I'll give you a project that, like a monkey, you should go through the project, and I'll pat you on the head. We're in a place where we're trusting the students to learn themselves, to create exciting challenges, and to learn to self-govern. And so we're creating schools full of not really teachers or coaches. I mean, think of instead of a teacher, think of a coach, a game designer. And we've now got 2 other Actons open. We plan to open at least 5 more this fall and probably up to 7 more. So we're going to be opening Actons all over with entrepreneurs who want to create this kind of environment, and we're providing all the tools to do that.
Do you find any pushback from the licensing authorities and powers that be?
Yeah, I'm not an educational licensing expert, so we're telling everyone if someone wanted to start one in Massachusetts or in Illinois, we'd say, look, you need to check your own state regulations. My understanding is in a dozen or so states, this is very easy to do. In another dozen or so states, it's fairly easy. And in about 15 or 20 states, you'll go to jail for trying it. So there are places that the Acton model won't work because the regulatory environment will not allow homeschooling or these kind of innovative schools.
So it's a real red state, blue state divide kind of thing.
Yeah, I have not even seen a list of which states it'll work in because we don't want to get into state regulatory business. But my understanding is, about half the states you can do it in, and sadly the other half you can't.
So, Jeff, what's the single message you'd want to get across to parents considering this kind of education?
Well, I think that message is simple. trust your children. They can do far more than you can imagine. Listen to them, challenge them, don't control them. But the children are capable, both in the apprenticeships and in these quests we design and in self-paced learning, of doing far, far more than we're asking of them in the world.
So raise your expectations of your children.
Absolutely. Set the bar high, trust them, challenge them, get them out of an environment where they're being controlled, because you don't want a docile child. You want a child that will ask really hard questions and has the courage to go out and change the world.
If it's your dream to remake American education, we need a lot more education entrepreneurs than just you. Where are they going to come from?
Well, there's lots of them out there, and I think they're going to come from parents. I think parents who are not willing to put up with the status quo, who know that learning to know isn't enough these days. You have to learn to do, and you have to learn to be courageous and form character. I think this is going to come from an army of parents. In fact, in the state of Texas, where we are, in the state of Texas, there are now more homeschoolers, 350,000 homeschoolers, than there are private schoolers. So I think you're seeing double-digit rates in homeschooling, and those parents can go out and create alternative schools like we have that are probably going to be the thing that saves the union.
So it's a matter of harnessing all that parental energy.
Absolutely. It's a matter of, if you're going to be a parent and you're going to go to the trouble to homeschool anyway, you might as well run a school like we do with a dozen or 2 dozen or now 100 students. And by the way, it can be quite lucrative, particularly if you have the students doing the teaching. Now, we're a not-for-profit, so we're not trying to make money. But if you get the right model, this is actually a great path towards entrepreneurship and making a lot of money while you do a lot of good.
You know, while I was preparing to speak with you, I stumbled on an article you wrote in Forbes about a year and a half ago. And the title was, "The One Key Trait for Successful Entrepreneurs, a Tolerance for Ambiguity." I got to tell you that struck a chord because back in the late 80s, when I joined my first startup, it was founded by a guy named John Ellenby, who was the inventor of the laptop and the founder of Grid Systems. And this was his favorite expression. He said entrepreneurs had to have a high tolerance for ambiguity. What do you mean by that?
The tolerance for ambiguity came from a professor of mine at Harvard named Amar Bidet. And Amar said that entrepreneurs have to be able to look at the mountain and say, that's where we're headed. We're headed to that mountain because it's the only that confidence that will get a team moving in one direction. At the same time, unless you want to charge off a cliff, you need to be saying to yourself, that's probably not the right mountain. In fact, we're going to probably have to change direction somewhere along the way. Most people can't handle that cognitive dissonance. The entrepreneur's not lying. They're saying right at this moment, that's the mountain. I'm also going to be humble enough to look for new input to say I may need to change direction slightly. But most people can't hold both those concepts in their mind at the same time. That's where we're headed, and I'll probably have to change direction. So it's that tolerance for ambiguity that very few people have is what marks an entrepreneur with the courage to move forward.
As an investor, I've certainly seen that in our founders and CEOs. As we wrap up, Jeff, let me ask you one final question.
Sure.
Who was Lord Acton, and why did you take his name for your programs?
So Lord Acton is the 18th century British philosopher of freedom. And the reason that I respect Lord Acton so much is he believed that religious liberty, economic liberty, and political liberty were all inextricably entwined. If you lose one, you lose them all. And his most famous quote was, "Power tends to corrupt, and absolute power corrupts absolutely." So as we're preparing our students to go out and change the world, we want them to understand that probably their biggest threat is the fact that once they change it and become powerful, it can corrupt their own soul, and they need to be preparing for that as much as to go out and become a leader.
Jeff, this is so exciting. It almost makes me want to have kids again. And what I do want to do is follow up at some later time and come back around to the Acton MBA and talk about higher education. But thank you so much for being on our show today, and best of luck.
Thanks, Bill. Thank you for what you're doing.
That wraps up our program. Thanks for listening, and thanks to Jeff Sandifer from the Acton Academy for being with us. Tune in to Real Clear Radio Hour, brought to you by the Competitive Enterprise Institute, every Saturday at this time. Or drop by realclearradio.org for the podcast version of all our shows. I'm your host, Bill Frezza. See you next week.